Well, good evening, everybody. This is Michael, and I'm working here on a treatise on white magic video commentary. We're on number 45 in Rules for the Astral Plane, and this means that when we have completed this, we will have done 95 programs on a treatise on white magic, and well, we're about 2/3 through the book. Now, in our last commentary, we talked about the use of the mind. So, three clear statements that will sum up the work of the disciple as he struggles to master the energies of the mental world. Work on the mental plane produces the realization of duality. And of course, the duality which must be noticed is between the higher and the lower pairs of opposites. So the mind begins to record two types of energy or two types of manifestation of the one life. It records and interprets the world of phenomena and the world of souls. So it's sensitive to the three worlds of human evolution, but also equally sensitive to the kingdom of the soul. So this is a dual recognition. Earlier types of dualities may occur on the horizontal level, but there comes a time when, in fact, the higher and lower of the pairs of opposites are really recognized. Then finally, unity supervenes. Later, the soul and its instrument become so unified and at one that duality disappears and the soul knows itself to be all that is. Now, that almost sounds like the being itself knows itself to be all that is. I usually use the word soul to represent the consciousness of the being, all that has been and all that ever will be. And that is a very important realization that the being that is what we are, essentially. It's the only thing that ever has been and ever will be. And all things, all perceptions, all emanations of this one being share the one beingness and identification or identity as that one being. So we work from differentiation to unity and finally to a oneness which cannot be gainsayed. You can't say anything against it because it is so immediately obvious. And it is the greatest of all perceptions or identificatory realizations. So that's where we were with the last discussion. Now we're gearing up here to see something that is quite amazing. It's one of my favorite sections in the Tibetan's writing. It's very old, very old, millions of years old. If you give the chronology of theosophy and the Tibetans' statements credence, if you believe. There is a curious and ancient Atlantean chant, which is no longer used, I suppose, at least not in the way it was used. You know, many things have fallen away from our understanding. The manner in which words were pronounced, the notes upon which they were pronounced a lot of the technicalities have fallen away. And, it kind of makes me want to make this all a little bigger, I wonder if I can do that. I hope so. Okay. I memorized this chant, and it fades in and out, of course, but it has been an important addition to my perception of the spiritual realities of life. Okay, so here it is. It was chanted by the initiate who took the third initiation, the consummating initiation of that period, that Atlantean period, I suppose, before the fourth initiation was allowed in Atlantis, and I think it was at some point. It goes as follows, and the translation of the symbols in which it was written necessitates the loss of rhythm and potency. Well, let's put it like this. At least we have meaning. Okay. Not he, but have. Okay. At least we have meaning. I mean, these things will come back, and they will come back in their true pitches, their true notes, their true rhythm, their true accents, and then we will have some very powerful possibilities. Let me read it straight through, and I think, I may have done this already in some of my other broadcasts, maybe from Esoteric Psychology too. Let's see how many of these he lists, how many times he lists this. So we'll zoom here and we'll go to, let's say, 150, and we'll take the hidden in so we know what page we're on. And let's see. I stand between the heavens. Okay, I think twice. Here's In Discipleship in the New Age, Volume 1. That may be where I worked on it. And here's a treatise on white magic. Those two places, this ancient Atlantean chant can be found. Of course, there are so many people that think it is pure fancy, invention, imagination, that Atlantis ever existed, or Lemuria, or those ancient civilizations which were elevated. For them, there is only caveman, gradually developing agricultural man, let's say, gradually civilizing human being until we have what we have now, which is considered to be the acme of human development. But, of course, those of us who study the ageless wisdom do not believe that we at this time represent the acme of human development. Greater developments than we have achieved have been achieved by those who went before us, and there's been periodical falls and rebuilding, and again falls. It's represented more a wave than a steady ascent. Anyway, let me first read this. I stand between the heavens and earth. I vision God. I see the forms God took. I hate them both. Naught do they mean to me, For one I cannot reach, and for the lower of the two I have no longer any love. Torn am I. Space and its life I cannot know, and so I want it not. Time and its myriad forms I know too well. Pendant I hang twixt the two, desiring neither. God from high heaven speaks. There is a change. I hear with ear attentive, and listening turn my head. That which is visioned, yet visioning could not reach, is nearer to my heart. Old longings come again, yet die. Old chains of, not clamor, but, wow, you see, there are little mistakes here in the transference. Old chains, let's see, what do we have? Aha. Well, maybe I'm the one who is mistaken here. No, this says old chains of glamour, not with clamor. Oh, goodness. I think it's this, old chains of glamour snapped. Forward I rush. Myriads of voices speak and halt me in my tracks. The thunder of the sounds of earth shuts out the voice of God. I turn me on my forward path and vision once again the long-held joys of earth and flesh and kin. I lose the vision of eternal things. The voice of God dies out. Torn am I, torn again am I, but only for a little time. Backward and forward shifts my little self, e'en as a bird soars into heaven and settles back again upon the tree. Yet God in his high place outlasts the little bird. Let me check on this. God in his high place outlasts the little bird. Thus do I know that God will victor be, and later hold my mind and me in thrall. Hark to the joyous paean that I chant, the work is done. My ear is deaf to all the calls of earth except to that small voice of all the hidden souls within the outer forms, for they are as myself. With them I am at one. God's voice rings clear, and in its tones and overtones, the little voices of the little forms dim and fade out. I dwell within a world of unity. I know all souls are one. Swept am, God's voice rings clear. Yeah, we did that. Swept am I by the universal life, and as I sweep upon my onward way, the way of God, I see all lesser energies die out. I am the one, I God. I am the form in which all forms are merged. I am the soul in which all souls are fused. I am the life, and in that life, all little lives remain. Well, I find this marvelous, and a great reminder. Now, we're not going to be able to do it the way it was done, and DK and a few Um, a few lines later will explain why we cannot, at this point, do as was done. Okay, but maybe when the wisdom returns and the sources are made known to us and the proper way of applying ancient methods is again given to us, we will use such chants as this, and they will have strong effect. Well, let's take a look at it from the analytical perspective and see what it might mean to us. Now, of course, I'm sure you have your own idea of what it can mean. And if it inspires you, that idea will be impressive, and maybe some of you will be inclined to memorize this and use it to see God, to be God, to identify as God. Of course, such statements as I just made are considered to be blasphemous and heretical, but that's because the concrete mind divides things and divides God's creation from God. The self-becoming one becomes the creating one, and when you create, it's not you, but in the task, the process of self-becoming, then it is you. You, God, I, God, become all these things. It's a big, big debate. And if we believe according to the self-becoming one, then we are philosophical pantheists. And I think enlightened students of the mysteries become that. Philosophical pantheists. You can't. God had only itself out of which to create or which to become. It didn't reach into something else, and that something else becomes separate from what it is. All things derive from and are extensions of the being, God. Some people tire of the word and they say, oh, we got to get rid of the G word, you know. And I admit that it has been much misinterpreted and under the limitations of the concrete mind. But we can restore this word to its proper dignity. I remember, if I only could find it again, but Buckminster Fuller gave his definition of God, and of course, a genius on the seventh ray there with lots of fourth and third ray. Well, that wasn't going to be an ordinary definition of God. I'll find it again. It's just quite amazing, and his use of language is far beyond the comprehension of many people who say they believe in God, you know. But then we do make God in our own image, and according to our limitations, so are the limitations of our conception of what the deity is. So if only we could understand that and realize that there are different spheres of imagination and different spheres of perception, and you cannot expect one who has had many lives and thought much on these matters to view God, the being, in the same limited way as those who are just beginning to develop the concrete mind. And of course, all the wars get fought over these differences in perception. So let us look here and let us see what comes to our mind. Okay, so the word curious is curious. Let's just say that it is so different from the way we express ourselves today that it arouses the curiosity of the student. Imagine that, having the library card to this library where ancient symbols come to life, and imagine the task of translating these symbols into modern English language. Of course, I'm sure with the help of Alice Bailey, but then the masters have to study these instruments by which they can reach us, as primitive as the instruments may seem compared to their ability to read the ideographic language. Well, anyway, I stand between the heavens and earth. The heavens, well, let's see here. I think this would be, I'm going to get out Tuya's diagrams here that are really excellent. And let's try to open that. Here are the heavens, anything above the lower mental plane. The world of the solar angel, the projection of the solar angel into the higher mental plane. The spiritual triads are heavens, and the monadic plane is a heaven. The logoic plane is a seventh heaven. And St. Paul, the Tibetan hints, gave a kind of statement that could not be understood by those who translated him. He talked about, was it touching, something like that, the seventh heaven, as it is reflected in the third, and the third heaven would be the higher mental plane. So all of those are the worlds of heaven, and the lower 18 subplanes, in a way, the worlds of the earth. They are the dense physical substance, the dense physical body of the planetary logos, and the lower 21, the dense physical body of the solar logos. I think there maybe should be a discrimination made. He does definitely tell us that the lower 21 subplanes are the dense physical body of the solar logos. I'm not sure he tells us that the lower 18 subplanes are the dense physical body of the planetary logos, but certainly they are part of the dense physical body, at least of the solar logos and of the planetary logos. The question arises when the planetary logos considers the higher mental plane, what does he consider it? Is it part of an etheric system on the mental plane? It may be. Anyway, we can think in that direction. So let me think. We don't need that. So I, like all disciples, I, the disciple, am caught between the pairs of opposites. I am aware of the heavens. I've entered a spiritual developmental phase in my life. If I were traveling through the hall of ignorance, I couldn't say that, could I? I would have to, let's see, what would I do? I guess I go all the way to the very end. Yes, I'd be in the Hall of Ignorance with petals 1, 2, and 3, opening, of course, not with my knowledge, but they would be opening, and I would not be aware of the higher of the pairs of opposites. I would not be aware. So there would only be earth. There would only be what you see is what you get. There would only be a kind of a unification uh, in my perception, and the senses would contain it all. Of course, since I'm individualized, I would discriminate between myself and what the senses reveal, but that would be a lower self, and it would not be a heavenly self at all. All right, I'm going to, take these lines line by line. I vision God. Well, whatever that means to me, at least I have the vision of the higher powers. I imagine, I vision, I'm impressed by the exaltation of what I call God, or the higher energy, and that is looking above. I'm looking above. I, the disciple, am looking into the higher worlds. Okay, come on now. There we go. I look toward the soul. I look towards the spiritual triad. I'm putting it in terms of what the disciple in the modern world would do. I look toward the atmic realm of spiritual will. I look toward my spirit. I look toward the sea of fire. I mean, those things probably would not be identified as such in the Atlantean days. The mentality was not as acute as it is now. The third ray had not yet really done its work, the acute energy of divine mental perception. So I see the higher, and I also see the forms that God took. Now, did God create those forms, or did he become those forms? To me, God, the being, uh, became those forms. God, it extended himself itself into the forms. You can't really say male or female. That's a gross exaggeration. And, I did a lot of music work in the various churches, conducting choirs. I think I went through the whole age of Pisces as a choir director. And I was always impressed by certain ministers who prayed this way: Father, Mother, God, Father, Mother, God. And then that whatever the prayer might be, but, it wasn't just Father. It wasn't only that. And I think that's the fair way to do it. And I think that with Libra coming powerfully into the planetary horoscope, that is the way we will think of the deity. The divine hermaphrodite, and in this case it's Mercury, who is male, not neuter, and Venus, who is female, Hermes, Aphrodite. Well, but the reaction is so human. I hate them both. I'm angered. I'm repelled. I cannot embrace them. Negative feelings arise in me because I've got to dismiss them from my mind, because I just cannot deal with them. I cannot give my life to one or the other. Naught do they mean to me. I mean, they could mean something to me, and they will, but at this particular stage, I have to dismiss them. For one I cannot reach. The disciple sees a vision far beyond his own capabilities. He measures himself, and he develops that, what the Tibetan calls the spiritual inferiority complex. When you measure yourself against divinity or against spirituality, and you feel quite hopeless in the possibility of becoming that or reaching that or engaging with that. For one I cannot reach, obviously, the heavens, the higher energies, and for the lower of the two, the lower 18 subplanes, the realm of the personality, I have no longer any love. I loved them then, and for millions of years I loved them and thought that in sequence, the body, emotions, and lower mind were the only thing that was. I was in the hall of ignorance. I didn't know it. And maybe now I begin to know it as I enter the hall of learning about the pairs of opposites. You know, it meant a lot to me. I gave a talk once about pairs of opposites, and I discovered that there were horizontal pairs of opposites, which are not necessarily one better than the other. You know, hot and cold are opposites, and even up and down are opposites if you don't attach a philosophical meaning to them. There are all kinds of opposites that we're dealing with in our ordinary life, and you cannot say, because they are on the horizontal level, that one is better than the other, but there are also the pairs of opposites which have altitude and depth. And Libra, the light that moves to rest, is that it? Page 339 or so of Esoteric Astrology. Well, it's getting close anyway. Or is it 329? Maybe it is 329. Yeah, 330. The light that moves to rest. This is the light that oscillates until a point of balance is achieved. It is the light which is distinguished by moving up and down. And, you know, for a long time, I had considered Libra in a horizontal manner and not as up and down. But that makes a lot more sense because in this particular case, the higher of the pairs of opposites is qualitatively better as we advance along the path and represents a greater degree of spirituality. So do study these lights. We do mention them when we have the discussion in the pre-full moon webinars. And that was a revelation to me because, you know, when you think of the scale, you think of this, you know, up like this, you know, balancing in a horizontal manner. So we have to, in the Hall of Learning, we deal very much with the vertical pairs of opposites. Okay, so it's so typically human. Sour grapes, really. I just have to put that in, you know, the story of the fox who could not reach the grapes. And so he dismisses their value. He negates their value. Oh, they probably were sour anyway. And, you know, again, that's such a human way of dealing with it in our present stage of ignorance. So he knows he can't reach. This is, you know, many, many years may pass between the beginning of this ancient stanza and the end. Okay. Oh, well, My chronometer just went kaflooey, but I had resolved to myself that I was going to do the entire stanza anyway. So maybe it won't make any difference. If it's an odd number, it's an odd number. And for the lower of the two, I am nauseated. I have no longer any love. Pluto has done its work. Pluto, to me, is the planet of nausea, among other things. You get things out of your system, you throw them up, you throw them out, you purge yourself, and you wonder how you could have loved those things anyway when you look back. So the development, spiritual development of ours, takes us into this law of repulse, very much ruled by Scorpio, and a rejection of the things to which we were attached. So there he is, he, she, the disciple, caught between high and low, between God and the forms God became, feeling incapable, inferior, nauseated. This is what's called the wretched aspirant. The wretched aspirant. It's such a word, wretch, because if you think about it, when you are throwing up, you're nauseated, then you are retching. This is the verb. And, it's a very uncomfortable feeling. You feel like you could die. But something's being thrown out of your system, and thus it is for the aspirant. So this feeling of being torn between high and low, and even between horizontal pairs of opposites, very unpleasant way of dying, I think, to be drawn and quartered. I'm recalling that, that was going to be the usual punishment for someone like Sir Thomas More, who was now a master, so it is said. But he was Henry's friend, and Henry had to see him executed, but decided to do it in the swift way, with a sword, losing the head rather than being dismembered. But I think psychologically some of us may feel, like torn in all directions and very unpleasant. Space. Well, space is an entity, but we're talking about inner space too. We're not just talking about the vastness of the cosmos. We're talking perhaps about great beings that live in the further reaches of space. But they're the high spaces within inner space. And the disciple here just has no hope. He gives up, in fact, before the impressive possibilities of true divinity. DK and his group say, well, don't you think we have maybe more interesting things we might wish to pursue than taking care of you? But, it's the sacrifice, and every mother or father knows it. When you have to take care of the children, you sometimes have to turn your back on what it is that you as an individual might pursue. So there's the estimation. I can't, it is said, at this stage. And so I wanted not. Now that's kind of interesting because it is the sour grapes attitude. I can't reach it, so I don't want it. Really, you do want it, but you're not admitting to others and to yourself that you continue to want it. You just try to dismiss it from your mind. Inwardly, there is the reach towards those higher things, but it's so uncomfortable to continue to desire them that the desire or aspiration for them is driven underground, and you convince yourself that you really don't want them after all. Time, which divides everything up, well, in other words, without division, there is no time. When there's absolute, invariable oneness, there is no time. When division and distinction enter, the possibility of time also enters. We might call it duration within the field of perception. It's about appearance and disappearance. Two things are noticed, but one of them disappears in its present state and the other continues. So that which continues to be visible is said to take more time, and that which disappears in this case to take less time. But again, if you can't divide and remember the boundless immutable principle, in essence, you can't divide it, then there is no time. But anyway, the myriad forms, time and form, they agree. We learned that. Page 285. Well, let me just go here and do it another way. So if we go to, 150, no, that's not it. I'm going to zoom in, and we'll call it 150, and we'll also keep the page numbers visible. But if we go to page 902, 285, we're going to see it. Time is, being descends to manifest. Creation is, that descent, it's pretty well telling you that creation is the descent of being. Time then and form agree. Being and time do not agree. And we could ponder long and hard on that one. But pretty well, when you're looking at this ancient chant, that's what's being said here. Time and its myriad forms. All those divisions create many different durations of time, many different time units. But again, it's rejection, it's nausea, it's I've had enough of this. I mean, we have to find that we have been in this situation. We have been repulsed or are repelling that which we once embraced so thoroughly. So time and its myriad forms, those two things go together. I know too well. Sometimes when you, as beautiful as a thing or place may be, when you show it to someone who's really gotten tired of it, they just have the attitude of rejection. So here we are between the pairs of opposites, pendant, hanging there, not able to do much. If you are hanging between two things, you kind of wonder how you can deal with either one of them satisfactorily. Pendant I hang betwixt the two, between the higher and lower pairs of opposites, and basically so sick and tired of the old one, and so self-judging and inferior in the presence of the higher one, that basically I don't want either one of them. I'm really fed up with the lower, and I spare myself by pretending that I do not desire the higher energies, because it's too heartrending, too painful, too crestfalling to continue to emphasize desire for the higher and not be able to achieve it and not ever think you can. So, see if you can identify with these things. See if you can find within yourself the experience. Tornamai, space in its life. There's the life aspect there. The pure being, the thing that never dies, the thing that was never born, the most wonderful thing. I just can't know it. And so to save myself, spare myself the pain, I pretend I don't want it. And I convince myself that I don't want it when eating away within me that I refuse to look at is the real desire, the real wanting of it. Then I look at all the phantasmagoria. DK comments on the phantasmagoria, even associated persons, he says, and the Buddha is basically saying the same. When dealing with the phenomenal world, why should we attach ourselves to things of the phenomenal world? So that which passes away in all of its myriad forms, I don't want it. I'm disgusted by it. I just can't take it in anymore. It makes me want to throw up, okay? And there I am, sort of helpless between the two, really not knowing what to do. But there's something happens now. The third sort of little stanza here. God from high heaven speaks. So there's an impress of energy from above. Maybe the soul has been contacted. Maybe some work with the Antakarana has succeeded, but something is impressing the consciousness from the realms of higher vibration. And I notice the difference. You know how things surprise you? Good things related to consciousness. You're doing whatever. You're taking a shower. You're, shaving. You're doing whatever. And unbeckoned and unannounced, and suddenly some really important perception strikes you. And you say, well, where did that come from? Well, it's always been there, but maybe some kind of alignment of sensitivity made reception possible. Maybe you just weren't in your usual, mental turmoil, turning thoughts around and around, deflecting the higher thing. Maybe you just stopped deflecting for long enough. Maybe things got still for long enough because you were just kind of focusing upon outer physical things. And so the subtle bodies, the psychological bodies, rested for a moment, and they were impressed because nothing blocked the incoming of the higher energies. That's God. There is a change. I'm paying attention. I hear with ear attentive. I'm listening now. It used to be that, I give up before I even start. It's too big for me. I'll never achieve. I feel bad about it. I dismiss it from my mind. I'll think about something else, but it eats away at you. I hear with ear attentive and listening. Turn my head. I turned my head. I was focused on some other things, mundane, maybe, self-pity, maybe, other things that were not God. But wait a second. Hearing helps us locate an object in space. That's what DK tells us as he talks about the value of the various senses. So I turn away from the direction in relation to which I was focused, and I see something different, and I hear something different. That, and basically I turn my head, but it's almost like I lift my head. I lift, one disciple failed pretty badly, but DK says, okay, the tears are streaming down, but lift your face to the light and go forward. So listening, turn my head, listening, lift my head, that which I visioned before, this inspiring vision of God, of the higher energies, yet visioning could not reach. I had the vision, but I knew I'd never achieve it. It was impossible for me, is nearer to my heart. Now, the heart is a great organ of perception. I find, that when I'm trying to attune myself to being, I have to see with the senses, yes, but I have to feel with the heart before I can touch being. So to me, the heart holds not only the love aspect, but the life aspect is very much there. And the vision is becoming more real. And the heart is a great organ of assimilation, and it's closer, meaning that it's reachable. It's becoming vivid. Well, nothing lasts forever at this stage. There's a lot of interruption. You probably noticed, I certainly have, when I try to maintain a particular state of realization, even the effort to maintain it gets in the way of the maintaining. And the veil drops, and I don't see it or feel it anymore. And then it comes again. It's like, one of those sine waves, down and up, I see, I don't see, and so forth. Or the light, he says, do you want to be a steadily approaching point of light, or do you want to be that flickering light? We look at you and your light is burning, but now it's dim. Well, it's burning again. Oh, now it's dim. So we have vicissitude, oscillation. We just don't have steadiness yet. Anyway, there's a greater intimacy now with that deeply sought something, which the disciple had been pretending, I don't want it anyway. But the minute it comes within reach, indeed that disciple wants it. Well, but you're still, on the cross, and you're being pulled in opposite directions according to the pairs of opposites. Old longings come again. I lifted my head up, but maybe now something arises within me, and it pulls me in the other direction, and yet that too is inconstant. I remember in some days of my life that I was thinking of changing careers. I think I mentioned this once before. I've always been interested in the medical field, a lot of family prompting in that regard. And yet I was an artist and a singer and a director and all that. So I was fighting between these two things. Or my psyche with flow and ebb and flow, ebb and flow. In the morning, I might be convinced that I would follow one track. And by later in the afternoon, I could feel the turning away from what seemed so certain towards the other track. And this went on and on, days, weeks, months, painfully. So when you're caught, when a decision is being made within you, you don't necessarily have so much control until your will is applied. So the old things seem very vivid, and then you want them again, but on the other hand, they were not all that palatable in the long run, and their attraction or attractiveness fades away. And old chains that held you in lower worlds and in Kamamanas and in the world of the personality, you're free. They snap, something happens, and you just don't desire them anymore, and As DK says, when you get integrated, nobody can keep the newly integrated person from rushing across the bridge. They're so filled with that sense of power that comes when the power draining divisions are gone. So forward you rush. It can be forward, it can be upward. It's towards that vision you rush. But, how long does it last? That's the question. Now, we live in the faith that what cannot be accomplished in the beginning of our process can be accomplished as we persist. And the old adage, if at first you don't succeed, try again. This is what the masters have done, and they've stabilized their relation to the vision and to their identification with the higher states, which is not given to us all the time to do. But as we get more and more integrated, soul and personality, we can do it. We can, when we're beset by all kinds of mundane, apparently non-progressive chores, we can bring the perception of the soul right into them. So I may be carrying rocks, and somebody asks me, and I say, well, I'm carrying rocks. Or I could say, well, I'm carrying stones which will be shaped for the building of this cathedral. And those were long construction projects, could last 100 years, imagine. I remember when I first was in France and I saw, in this life anyway, the cathedral at Chartres. It just rose like an apparition out of the plain, and the little city was built around it. And I thought to myself, this was the center of life of this little city. And it took many decades. I haven't looked up how long it took, but I'm sure the internet would reveal to us how long did it take to build the cathedral at Chartres. Okay, so anyway, God has spoken, and even though you were pretending you weren't interested, you really are. Forward I rush. Well, the hare rushed forward when he realized the tortoise had passed him. But then he so far surpassed the tortoise that he thought he'd take a rest again. And rushing, what good does it do? Rush not from point to point. There is no rush, no hurry, and yet there is no time to lose. All of those things become true. But I'm rushing, but it's like having an elastic band. You're not, some chains of glamour have snapped, but the attraction of other chains, other magnetic bonds have not snapped. They're still there. Myriads of voices speak, the voices of the astral plane, the voices that are not oriented towards heaven, the voices that advise to stay in touch with normal life because it's the real thing, and they wear on me. Sometimes at the present stage of things, I have a couple of cats. I walk them on an expandable leash, and they'd like to just keep going. But until they're trained, we can't trust that. So they pull on the leash, and the leash sort of pulls it on them, and they kind of come back, They love to be on their own entirely. But, we've had some bad experiences that way. And all supervisors have to judge the merits and skills and abilities of those they supervise. You let a child play in the playpen, but you don't let them play on the street. It's obvious. Myriads of voices, lower voices, speak and halt me in my tracks. I've had that experience. That's what I'm sharing with you. And the thunder, very loud, and attention-getting of the sounds of earth, just overwhelmed by all of that noise, all that commotion, shuts out the voice of God. It's an ongoing oscillatory experience. We're just not free from all the forms speaking up in time and space and attracting us again, as once they did, because we have not purified ourselves totally of our sympathy with those things. And I turned me on my forward path. I was rushing forward and brushing upward, whatever, up the mountain, whatever. But I turn around. And the top of the mountain seems so far, so cold, it begins to fade, the possibility of reaching it. And so I turn around and see all the joys that held me. I vision once again the long-held joys of earth, and I mean long, millions of years. Those petals in the Hall of Ignorance, especially the first two, they take a really long time to unfold. The closer we get to the jewel and the lotus, the faster those petals unfold and the faster those capabilities become ours. But I turn me on my forward path and begin to longing. They were long held, and I begin to long for them again. My vision once again. I don't see God anymore now. Something else is coming in. Was God just a figment of my imagination? Was being a figment of my imagination? So I vision once again the long held, and there's that hint in the word held, because it's been said, that all of Buddhism can be contained in the words "let go." So I vision once again the long-held joys of earth and flesh and kin. I lose the vision of eternal things that always last, things that are real, things that are higher, things that have that aspect of permanence about them. And my vision closes down. The sixth ray type, in the law of repulse, a shutter seems to close. And how was that put? Shutter. There's not shutter. Because it's in the wrong book. Not much, but here it is. A shutter. The opening dimmed its light. He was rushing along and he thought he saw something. A shutter seemed to close. The vision he had seen no longer shone. The follower stumbled in the dark. There's some parallels here with what's going on. Life ended and the world of thought was lost. Pendant, he seemed. Again, you notice the similarity. He hung with naught below, before, behind, above. To him, naught was. It's a very depressing moment, and thank goodness it's relieved by the word of the soul. So this is in the sixth ray law of repulse, page 170. Okay, so there we are, but there has been progress. Even though the voice of God dies out, and even though the higher vision fades, it's not for so long this time. Yes, there is a rending, the feeling of being torn between this and that, but you know, God is getting stronger. Torn again am I, but only for a little time. Backward and forward shifts my little self. I'm the one in between, right? I am the disciple in between, the aspirant. The personality is not the disciple. The disciple is that state of being consciousness between the lower vehicle and the higher vehicles. It's a point of being consciousness. Backward and forward shifts my little self, e'en as a bird soars into heaven and settles back again upon the tree. I want to fly to the high heavens, but they seem too high and too vague, and I estimate that I'll never make it, and at least I can be sure of something, the tree, the old life, the long-held joys of earth and flesh and kin. Well, you know, the world, the flesh, and the devil. For the 246 type, it takes a long time to overcome that flesh part and the close family relations. Nothing wrong with them, but if one gets so attached to the outer personality of one's relations, then one is missing real relationship with that individual. So I lose the vision of eternal things. The shutter seems to close, and the voice of God dies out, and I'm going to be torn, but the time sequence is less. Yes, I go backward and forward, up and down. Master Moria talks about getting blisters on your feet because you do so much forward and backward. The dance of forward and backward. 2 steps forward, 2 steps back, 2 steps forward, 1 step back, 2 steps forward, eventually. So, not quite airborne here. I still rely upon that tree, which is the tree of the familiar states. But here's the confident moment, the realization, yet God, in his high place, the higher states of being consciousness found within the cosmic ethers and beyond, just endures. It outlasts the little bird that has limited strength and tries to fly into heaven without sufficient strength, but becomes tired and returns. So that impression of rising confidence comes in, and it's so necessary when propelling yourself along the path to have that feeling of higher consciousness and that you can achieve it. If we don't have confidence in our vision, we'll never make the necessary efforts to do that. So I have confidence, yet God in his high place, so I realize, will outlasts the little bird. I'm not just that isolated little disciple. I am the higher self. I am God. And I will outlast the oscillation, the vicissitudes, the cycles, the coming and going. I will outlast the changes which have given or produced so much instability. Thus do I know. See, here comes that conviction of the disciple. And later on the path, it's not just wishing, you know, you have conviction that God will victor be. The higher self will prevail, whatever you think that higher self may be, and later hold my mind and me in thrall. In other words, I still have my lower self, but my mind will be infused by the light of God, the love of God, the will of God, and I will be God's prisoner. You know, I was prisoner to form. Now I am prisoner to all the higher impulses. I can't let them go. They will determine my life, and I will cooperate. I will acquiesce. You might say that Christ became um, enthralled by the will of God, entered into his agreement with God that he would follow that will. The word all is right in there, isn't it? Interesting. Because we have become a prisoner to wholeness, to the realization, inclusive realization of the one being. And I don't know how many of us can say that we are that yet. Now there is a burst of joy because a victory has come, and now the higher realizations really start coming in. Hark, all you who will try to ascend in this way. Here's the teacher coming out in the victorious disciple. Hark to the joyous paean that I chant. And the word is chant because it's a seventh ray on a sound, music on a certain pitch and with a certain rhythm. It's not just hark to the joyous paean that I say. It's a song, a song of victory. Song of victory. And the musical and rhythmic element is there. And maybe it'll help you if you do hearken to the joyous paean that I, the self-realized one, am chanting forth. The work is done. I realize it. The blockages and frustration of the contending forces, the instability, the unsettledness, all that is gone. From now on, we're in the realm of victory, and in this chant, we're describing it. My ear, what I really attend to. Remember how I attended to the voice of God, but then I attended to all the myriad voices, and I kept on turning my head in different directions, attracted by this, attracted by that. But now, something shut out. My ear is deaf to all the calls of earth emanating from the, maybe you want to say the 18 lower subplanes, except to that small voice. Remember the idea that the voice of the soul is the voice of the silence, and it comes as a still, small voice. My ear is deaf to the calls of earth. I now fully attend to the higher ethers on the cosmic physical plane, where more advanced spirituality is to be found, except to that small voice. This is the compassion angle. The small voice of the hidden souls, because they're hidden by the personality within the outer forms. I recognize an identity with them. I no longer use the thought my soul and thy soul, for they are as myself. With them I am at one, and so I recognize my oneness with all the hidden souls within the outer forms, and I don't look at them as personalities only. I have an identity with them. I am the same as they are, and when I look at somebody, I just feel in the heart that oneness with them, that identification. So even though I'm not listening to all the clamor, the glamour and the clamor of the world of noise, I am able to see the little hidden soul in everything and in everyone. And I realize my identity with them, and I relate to them on the basis of that identity. Well, I'm happy now, I'm singing the joyous paean that I sing. The work is done. God's voice, the voice of the higher powers and the higher energies, rings clear. Now below, there's been so much clamor and confusion and chaos and noise. How could you get any clarity out of that? The astral plane is not only filled with all kinds of chimeras and misleading forms and things dissolving and reaggregating and confusing conditions that are not real, but that it's that way with sounds too. There's so many misleading sounds, uh, saying sometimes very bad things, and people think it's spiritual. They listen to it and they do horrible things because they've attended to the general clamor of the astral plane. God's voice rings clear about time and in its tones and overtones. In other words, I'm aware of the subtle worlds. You know how it is in music. You play a certain note, let's say on the piano, and then a bunch of little partials. They're called partials. They are sounding as well. They are higher in pitch than the tone you have played, and there's certain law about which partials will or overtones will appear with the striking of any note. Probably some of you have heard those things, but you have to train your ear just a little bit to listen to the tiny little overtone sounds. But God has many things that it says explicitly, but there's a lot of hints in overtones about divine possibilities and things to come, and overtones belong to the higher worlds. God's voice rings clear, and in its tones and overtones, the little voices of the little forms dim and fade out. That's the general personality noise, which is just desultory and it's mundane and it just deals with the average world and inconsequential thing. It's just idle thought. It can be rendered into word. It can be selfish word. It can be word of hate. But this kind of sound doesn't mean much. It doesn't go anywhere. And it all dies out, dims and fades out. I hear God. And I hear or see God, the being, in every person I behold. So I dwell within a world of unity. Now, let's get to the point where we can really say that I know all souls are one. How to take the third initiation? Well, you have to, let's see, how does this chant go? He gave this to a Capricorn disciple who, I think took the second degree and maybe had her eye on the third degree. Shine forth. Let's see if I can find it that way. Oh, there's too many. Shine forth. Light. Let's see if I can find that for you. And I think I found it here. It appears in various ways, sometimes with slight changes of words. You know it, and it's a beautiful thing. And this Capricorn disciple, RSU, it was one of her favorite mantrams. May the holy ones whose disciple I am or whose pupil I seek to become, it depends who's using it, show me the light I seek. Give me the strong aid of their compassion and their wisdom. There is a peace which passeth understanding. It abides in the hearts of those who, and here's requirement number 1, who live in the eternal. There is a power which maketh all things new, It lives and moves in those who know the self as one. May that peace brood over us, that power uplift us until we stand where the one initiator is invoked, till we see his star shine forth. Oh, it's beautiful. And what are the two things we have to do? Live in the eternal and know the self as one. And if we can do that with consistency, then the third initiation is ours. Live in the eternal, know the self as one. So, where are we here? Yes, I dwell within a world of unity. I know all souls are one. So this is, in a way, living in the eternal, knowing the self as one. And the third initiation has been achieved. Now, the final stanza, or the final portion of this ancient form of great power it is, Swept am I by the universal life. Now, universal life, the life of the universe, okay, but also the life of the solar logos, remembering that when we use the word universal, we can mean the solar logos. Swept am I by the universal life, and as I sweep, there's no obstacles now, we're really moving, upon my onward way, onward and upward, the way of God, not the way of the past and the myriad of forms that agree with time and which hold us to kith and kin and the flesh. No, the way of God. I see all lesser energies die out. They're all subsumed in the one energy. All energies are one energy. All beings are one being. And now the affirmations. I am the one. Now we've got to know that. We've got to find out however we find out. I am the one, I God. God is the one. Being is the one. And I am the form in which all forms are merged. Krishna saw the great form of God, and the Krishna always saw the great form of God, but it's Arjuna to whom Krishna revealed the one form of God in which all forms are united. So I see God, and I see the one form consisting of all the little forms, and it's all one thing. I am the form in which all forms are merged. This is great. It's all about the experience of synthesis, fusion and synthesis. I am the soul, one soul, not my soul, thy soul, in which all souls are fused. Not is but me, not is but me. Great second ray statement. I am the life, that's being itself. And in that life, all little lives remain. The one life includes all the little lives, and I am that one life, and I include all those little lives, and they all came out of me, and I out of them. There's one life, one being, one form. It's the oneness that is realized here at the third initiation. I am the life, and in that life, all little lives remain. There's no outer here. Everything is included, a great inclusiveness, so that everything, not is but me, everything is seen as the me, as the I am. Now, we should meditate on every one of those 8 declarations. The life of the ashram is sweeping you along, even entering the stream before this occurs. You're being swept along. Swept am I by the universal life. And as I sweep upon my onward way, because I'm definitely not going backwards and I'm definitely not going downwards, the way of God, and I am liberated into the way of God, I see all these distinctions of lesser energies die out. I'm not interested. They're all one thing, and I can deal with them. And then I assert the fact. I am the one. It's just got to be realized if I have to find a way. I am the one, God is the one, God is being. I am the form, all these perceptions, which all forms are merged, the one form, consisting of all the forms. I am the soul, the consciousness in which all consciousnesses are fused. I'm looking through all eyes, I'm sensing through all senses, I'm touching through all sense of apprehension and touch. Whatever the sense may be, I'm there. I'm experiencing it. There's only one experience of all that, and it's multifaceted, and I am the life, the being itself. And in that life, all little lives remain. These words chanted in the ancient formulas on peculiar and selected notes, every note has its own meaning and its own tendencies, were most potent and brought definite results in certain ancient ceremonies which have long since died out. Well, I know that I haven't grasped it. I know I've grasped some of it, and I always combine it with page 285 in Dina 2, about which I've probably spoken somewhere. God is, time is, unity is, space is, God is, being cries forth and says, and finally, God is. Okay, so this ancient Atlantean chant and this formula, which is older than the stanzas of Dzyan, have to be used together. Now, I haven't any idea how long this all has taken. I know it's more than an hour and maybe more than an hour and a half. Not sure, but this is number, and we've only maybe done one page. We started on page 386, and 387 is where we are. One page, but you can see how important this is. It's just beautiful. And let's see, this is a commentary. Turns out this is the 8th after all. And now we're ending 45. It makes me always want to ponder, I want to sit here in the temple. I want to have my notebook out. I want to think, I want to go deeper and deeper into realization of these matters. So 386 and 387. And then we'll be working on commentary number 46. And we'll start with 387. And this will be the 30th program on Rule 10. And we don't know what day we'll do that. Maybe today, maybe tomorrow. Whatever. Okay. Okay, let's see if I can. So this will be an X and put in the line there. Okay, friends, I think that's enough for the moment. This is the 8th of September, and so it's the birth of Mary Day, the sacralizing of the earth, with the soul energy of the Christ consciousness, which is the soul consciousness of humanity. And I have to broadcast something here. So memorize that, You could do worse than to memorize that and repeat it to yourself, and especially, your situation, in bondedness or bondage gives way to the last three verses. Hark to the joyous paean that I sing, the work is done. And God's voice rings clear, and then that beautiful final eighth stanza, swept am I by the universal life, and as I sweep upon my onward way, the way of God, I see all lesser energies die out. I see God. Now you have to see the one and the many. We have to simultaneously, the many and the one, both are needed, and it must not be presumed that the many are independent of the one. They are derivative of the one. The one prevails and the many appear, and they have to be dealt with in the right way, but without the many, without the one, there would be no many. And we cannot really say that without the many, there would be no one. Okay, that'll be it. And then we'll go on to number 46 next time. Study hard. Lots of blessings and a lot of love. And we'll all get there, realizing when we're there that we've always been there, nowhere to get. So onward we go. See you later.